Mr. Amitabh Kant, Ambassador Sakis, welcome and thank you for joining us at the Global Technology Summit 2022. Mr. Kant, perhaps I could start with you, sir. Speaking at the closing session in Bali at the G20 Summit, Prime Minister Modi said that the principle of data for development would be an integral part of India's G20 presidency. What does data for development mean, sir?
So that's a very, very important question. When the Prime Minister spoke about this, he was referring to the rapid pace of digitalization in India and the global economy and how it is closely associated with a rise in the volume and the importance of digital data and how data can be used on a real-time basis to transform the lives of citizens. So data and data flows can help generate greater insights into progress towards sustainable development goals and support the development of various digital solutions to global developmental challenges. This was not possible earlier. Today, it is possible to get data on a real-time basis on performance. We can compare different geographical areas, whether it's blocks, districts, states, countries, put it in public domain, make these geographical areas compete with each other on outcomes, on health outcomes, learning outcomes, and make, the people will come to know whether a particular area is competing, whether it's performing or not. And therefore, the people who are responsible for delivery on ground will be responsible to the citizens. And therefore, data for development means unleashing this vast potential of data and data flows to foster growth and innovation towards sustainable development goals, especially in the global south, by bringing the power of digital technologies and data-driven insights to areas such as agriculture, health, education, and the green transition. In India, we run a program called the aspirational districts, the most backward districts, where on different indicators, we get data on a real time. We rank these districts. We put their performance in public domain. We name and shame them. And this has led to huge transformation in these districts. It brings in transparency. And therefore, applying big data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, to data sets can help identify gaps and highlight potential action areas for focused intervention. This includes using satellite imagery to improve poverty mapping, using sensors to monitor infrastructure projects, estimating crop yields and crop damage for insurance, etc. From the success of India's digital inclusion program, we understand that government have a very key role in catalyzing digital transformation for inclusive growth. India's focus on data for development is based on the approach that digital technologies have the potential to impact all sectors of the economy. And data-driven tools have allowed India to become more resource efficient in government interventions. Now, during India's G20 presidency, we propose to have data for development as a key priority and bring together a common understanding amongst all G20 member countries to give it a political and a huge economic momentum at the international level. We want to focus on capacity building and bridging the digital data divide. We hope to have productive discussions with G20 countries and bridge this data divide. And actually, these efforts will come together to help accelerate progress on SDGs and harness benefits of digital and tech transformation for all, including creation of opportunities in all developing countries. Thank you.
So thank you. Ambassador Saki, I want to stick with one term that Mr. Kant used, which was common understandings. And I also want to just quote to you what the Indian Prime Minister said at Bali. He said, that the proper use of digital technologies can become a force multiplier in the decades-long global fight against poverty. Clearly, digital transformation, technology, infrastructure, principles, and values are going to be central to India's G20 presidency. With Brazil joining the G20 Troika, how will Brazil work with India to make sure that the common understandings can be sustained in a G20 agenda to 2023 and beyond?
Thank you. This is a very important question. Definitely, Brazil and India share a common agenda on the digital transformation. The digital transformation can enhance our inclusion programs, both social, economic, and environmental inclusion, so to leverage from these technologies. We are fully committed to the digital economy agenda here in Brazil. As defended by also the Indonesian presidency, digital transformation and digital inclusion is instrumental to bridge development gaps and ensure that no one is left behind. We welcome this priority during the Indian presidency to foster digital inclusion as a means to achieve the SDGs. Brazil underwent a huge modernization which facilitated the access of its citizens to over 4,000 types of services online. We've made important progress in the sphere of public service in the digital, with digital technologies. A lot remains to be done in the agricultural sphere, in the private sector, and so on and so forth. And definitely, I'm sure India is going to lead us forward in that domain. We believe that we have an opportunity to put forward the data for development agenda. Data governance, I have to stress, is also a crucial issue, and we believe it should be addressed multilaterally. G20 has to recognize that and promote multilateral negotiations on this matter.
Thank you, Ambassador Sakis. If I could switch back to Mr. Kant.
Yeah.
Mr. Kant, if I could turn to you on a question of financial resilience. We're living in a time of massive global and geopolitical upheaval, food price rise, global inflation, and Bali, and unsurprisingly, the leaders' declaration highlighted the need for coordinated action to advance strong, inclusive, resilient global recovery. Under India's presidency, what are the kind of steps that may be taken to unlock investments in developing countries, strengthen financial resilience, and deliver sustainable development goals?
Public sources of funds, to my mind, will not be alone to bridge this investment gap in developing countries. The developed world needs to do a lot. Huge amount they need to do from public sources, but that will not be adequate. There's vast pool of funds are available, and private sources of funds will also be very critical in this endeavor. There's a recent study by OECD which has found that the low uptake of private and blended finance in developing countries was due to some high perceived investment risk. Concerned around capacity, a pipeline of projects, and policy uncertainty were some of the reasons cited by OECD. So there is a need to look at ways of enhancing credit flows to developing countries to reduce risks, and therefore pooling of risks is required. And multilateral development banks have to play a critical role in this regard. Rather than direct lending, multilateral development banks have to play a crucial role in creating an enabling environment for private capital to flow. Therefore, their role must shift from direct lending to facilitating the flow of credit. The Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, is already a part of the World Bank Group and provides credit enhancement services to developing countries. Now, the global financial system can effectively leverage this expertise. And credit enhancement is one such avenue, along with technical support to build up the governance and policy structures needed, where multilateral development banks can unlock SDG and climate finance for developing countries. And blended finance and first loss guarantees are other avenues through which funding could be scaled up. And blended finance is really the future, but this would require massive reforms in World Bank, IMF. All these institutions were set up in the post World War II period, in the Bretton Woods period, and they need to be restructured for SDGs, for climate finance in today's era. And therefore, capacities, while that is necessary, I would also say that we need to build capacities in developing countries, a pipeline of investable projects, digital governance, policy certainty. All these are important prerequisites to attract private and institutional capital. Now, India has made impressive strides in this regard. Our public digital infrastructure and governance model has been lauded across the world. Financial inclusion, digital health, and digital delivery of government benefits are just a few areas where India can help the developing world. And I think this is necessary. So action by the G20 towards changing the very nature of multilateral development financial institutions and building capacity on the part of the developing countries, both are important.
Ambassador Sakis, from blended finance and health security, if I could come to the critical question of food security or insecurity. Now, India has done a variety of things to promote natural farming, repopularizing nutritious and traditional food grains like millets, for instance, with a view to create an ecosystem for sustainable food security. What are the kind of steps that Brazil might be expected to either take forward or introduce on its own in 2023? Again, trying to push the boundary of consistency when it comes to the G20 agenda.
Thank you. Well, Brazil has a very important interest in that matter as an important food producer and food exporter. This is a priority and should be maintained as such, and also be at the very center of the trade and economic agenda of the G20. Sometimes developed countries would mention agriculture only in the context of increasing self-sufficiency in their ill-fated quest for food sovereignty as a villain for climate change, in their attempt to masquerade protectionist agendas. We need to take the opportunity to deal with agriculture in a manner that effectively contributes to sustainable development, such as food security, enhanced efficiency and productivity, and reduce trade distortions in agri-food systems. Again, as in other agendas, that agenda of food security should be one in which there is no one-size-fits-all approach. In any scenario, according to national strategies, agricultural trade will definitely play a central role in ensuring supply of products and inputs and further diversification and strengthened risk management agenda in this regard. So trade should be a part of that. Countries should put in place actions and measures consistent with the WTO rules, so to also strengthen their diversification and food security national strategies.
No, thank you, Ambassador Sakis. Again, the hope, of course, very much is with Indonesia, India, and Brazil holding the presidency. It is exactly these issues that will get the kind of global resonance that it deserves. But let me conclude with perhaps a slightly light-hearted question. From the photos from Bali, it looked like the majority of Sherpas seemed to enjoy some amount of Badhomi. It really looked like a group of troubleshooters. Is that the case, Mr. Kant? You were in Bali. There were these great photographs of you with all the other Sherpas, and it really looked like a group of serious troubleshooters who can get in a room and solve real-world problems, while at the same time keeping in mind that obviously India has played quite a critical role in building the kind of consensus that we saw out of the Bali Declaration. Is that the vibe that you have also felt within in Bali and that you hope to sustain through India's presidency?
So Sherpas act as the envoy of the leader. Their job is to really take the leaders on top of the peak. And Sherpas actually are, the word was coined in the context of taking the leaders on top of the Mount Everest. So our job is really troubleshooting. Our job is to build consensus. Our job is to be forward-looking, be progressive. Our job is to ensure that despite the various crises, we are able to take the leaders up on the mountain. And despite all the challenges, all the crises of post-COVID era, of geopolitics, of climate action, of global debt, of SDG having regressed, all these are challenges. These are all real-world challenges. But the admirable thing in Bali was that all Sherpas worked together. And it was important that Sherpas from the emerging markets, the developing world, particularly India, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Saudi, many other countries joined us. All of us worked together to ensure that the statement was balanced, there was a good consensus, and that it was forward-looking and progressive. And I would also like to give credit to G7, to Russia. Everyone joined hands and collaborated. And we eventually, despite all the challenges and despite over 15 ministerials having failed, all the meetings that had failed earlier, the Sherpas ensured, and I would like to particularly compliment my great friend Sakis, who played a key role along with India. And therefore, Brazil and India played a very major role in this initiative. And therefore, we could, because we worked together as a team, emerging markets worked together as a team, we were able to convince G7 to come out with a balanced statement. And we could then finally convince Russia and China to agree to what was being arrived at. And therefore, without the emerging markets, this consensus could not have been arrived at. And therefore, I would really like to appreciate the role of the Sherpas, and all Sherpas played a very positive and constructive role.
Mr. Khan, Ambassador Sakis, thank you so much for joining us at the Global Technology Summit 2022. Ambassador Sakis, I believe you will soon perhaps be on your way to India, to Rajasthan, and we look forward to welcoming you here. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much.